observing fractured worlds, whether it was Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Yemen. This filled me with a strong consciousness for the challenges of my surrounding world. And with it, a drive to change things at scale, tantamount to the vast scale of our challenges. But that drive and determination came to wrestle and clash with a reality in which the avenues for political participation were shut off or virtually inexistent. I discovered strength in the example of Martin Luther King, who found himself in front of political institutions that prohibited his participation. And so he worked to shift conscience and culture, to shift the court of public opinion with his mind and his pen and his peaceful protest. I learned from him that there are no excuses, not to take the way the world is as a given, to be rigid in change and to say that the institutions do not exist and therefore that I can't change things, but rather to be relentless in finding creative ways to express that drive to make a difference in the world, notwithstanding institutional constraints. I also took from him the importance and the power that exists in shifting culture and conscience, that it is no inconsequential thing. It is here where real change begins, shifting minds and hearts. That is where we most powerfully change laws. You see, laws existed to put an end to slavery in 1865, but law did not stop the egregious oppression of Black people through structural racism, through segregation, through economic subjugation. It was a slavery without the chains that shackled just the same. But it was the tireless efforts of the civil rights movement and its leaders, hard work to shift minds and hearts, to shift the court of public opinion, that 100 years later, we began to see life being breathed into the letter of the law and a pulse in the paper promises of the Constitution. And so, as a young girl civically engaged in the world, I found a space for action in writing and in speech. I found myself gravitating toward them as a means to challenge the status quo of my surrounding world with my ideas, my voice, my camera, and my pen. Fast forward several years. The Arab Spring was at its height. As a 20-year-old driven to make a difference and ignited by the call for justice and democracy, I was determined to take part in advancing that call. It was 2014. I was graduating from college. I had gained the chance to deliver the commencement address at my graduation as the first person from my background to have that chance in the university's 363-year history. I decided to use my platform that day to speak out against the suppression of civil liberties and rights of our people by their governments. I contrasted that with the power of a transformative chance at an education that pushed me to speak truth to power, to challenge the walls that we had been taught to fear all our lives, and to have the courage to vision new possibilities where we've been told by the world that it's impossible. I called on my peers to take the revolutions that our educations drove within our lives and to serve as 6,000 revolutions in our communities across the world, not in arms, but in minds. In the aftermath of that experience, I would face political repercussions for speaking up. But I also saw the reverberations of that message far beyond what I would have ever imagined. I heard from young people across the world who shared with me how they had decided to use their voices to speak up for justice and for truth in their communities, and how in doing so they catalyzed the action and impact of others. Through that experience, I learned two things. The first is the power that our voices have to make a difference in the world. And the second is just what happens when change becomes aware of itself in others, how it grows in momentum and strength in finding that it is not on its own, ignited to go forward farther. This solidified my conviction in my belief in a powerful education, one that emboldens critical conscience and a belief in our voices as the ultimate force with which to set off the positive transformation of our worlds and to drive lasting change. If that young girl version of me, who grew up watching Martin Luther King, searching for her voice in the world, had had any doubt of my ability to make a difference then, it was dispelled now. That experience empowered an unshakable belief that our actions, our small changes, they matter. They do have the power to change things. And so to have the courage to do the hard things, because we have the power to change things, courage, catalyzing courage, growing in momentum and strength into a powerful current for change that cannot be contained until the walls of injustice come crashing down and our calls for freedom and justice come crashing through. But core to that, I recognize, was an education that had given me the power of ground on which to stand, and a voice to transcend the boundaries of my context and reach for the world. A chance shut off to so many, and with it, their capacity to leave their mark. In recent years, I've found reinforcement for my belief as I've watched young people across the region and around the world rise up and speak their truth so powerfully, fighting for justice, for humanity, for conscience, shifting perceptions of the world on some of our most entrenched problems. I am ignited in purpose and reinforced in my belief. You see, without any pulpits or platforms of power, these young people are doing more for the causes of freedom and justice in 280 Twitter characters and 5-inch screens than many of our leaders over the generations. While they might not be shifting laws, they are shifting global conscience with their courage, their ideas, their voices, and grassroots action. They are shaking far more powerful institutions, nodes of impact. They galvanize the action and impact of others around them, a global force for change. And the common difference, the definitive difference among these young people is their access to a powerful education. It is their capacity to communicate themselves powerfully and to advocate for themselves in the world. It is the voice, the critical conscience, the power to speak their truths in their own words rather than to have their truths be told for them by the world. And to break free from the shackling narratives that define their contexts and to take agency over their own stories. You see, injustice cannot persist when we shine a light on it. Education is that light. That is why soldiers try to kill it and the Taliban tries to stop it. No, I'm not talking about rockets, but a girl with a book on her way to school. Because in this is the power to change everything. In this is the power to set our nations free. From Malala Yousafzai to Munal Kurd, we see proof of the possible, of just what happens, the rupture of worlds when young people are empowered with a chance. Fighting oppression with conscience, injustice with truth, fear with hope, pessimism with possibility. And so while our challenges might seem vast and unconscionable, when I'm told that change is impossible and our problems are impenetrable, I refuse to believe it. I refuse to believe it because of the defiance of that, the counterfactual that exists within our own lives. I refuse to believe it in every young person I've met risen to their potential, who shatters the narratives of impossible told of our worlds on the screens. If my life taught me anything, it is that there is nothing inherent to who we are that limits or predefines how far we go or what we become capable of when empowered with a fighting chance. We are each of us capable of anything and everything. And all those excuses of exceptionalism and anomalies that confine some of our societies to success and others to forever failure based off where we're from came crashing down for me in the face of equal opportunity. I am no better than the young girl in Syria, the young girl in Iraq. The difference is that I had a chance. I had systems that believed in me and empowered my potential, and if they had had my chance, what might become of our people in places written off as hopeless cases? What vast potential for progress resides in that? We are, each of us, the positive revolutions of our entire worlds waiting to happen when unshackled to reach our full potential. And so when I'm told change is impossible and our problems are impenetrable, I refuse to believe it. But it will take all of us to match the magnitude of the challenge before us. So to young people and to the young of heart, those voices of courage and catalysts of action, I say, persevere. Keep going in the work of change in the belief that you are making a difference against the countercurrents that would convince you that our voices do not matter and our actions are inconsequential. You are shifting global conscience, and conscience is where change begins. Keep going until our grassroots actions, they turn into global movements, until we hit a critical mass of conscience where injustice cannot exist. The greatest way we fight it is in shedding light on it. Persevere in the possible against the countercurrents of the impossible, in the belief that the world can change, has changed, will change, and that change is the only constant. In the eternal words of Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. But beyond this, beyond our activism and our persistence in it, we need to scale that capacity for impact and action. Ultimately, the most powerful way that you or I can lead change is in fighting for the chances of so many others to stand in our place and to lead their change. We do so most powerfully in breaking barriers and access to a life-changing education, setting off the chances of millions of others to fight for justice, for freedom, for truth across our communities far more powerfully than any change than you and I can drive on our own. It is only then that we become capable of the vast scale of our challenges. It is then that we most powerfully lead change in the face of our impossibles. Thank you.
Well, Sara, you've certainly found your voice. It's one of power, passion, and conviction. Thank you for empowering our youth to do the same and find their voices as well. We're going to be taking one question from the audience, and we have the microphone heading around. We have Sharbel here who has a question for you, Sara.
Thank you.
A lot of what you said applies really well in a system that allows change, like in America. But many systems, like the ones we have back home in Lebanon, Syria, other places, don't really allow change. So how do you get to, and many of our systems, particularly in Lebanon, where I come from, are stuck. No matter what you do, it's stuck unless you break the system and you redo it. How do you do that?
That's a fantastic question, and I think that's been the struggle that I've had, that I've been wrestling with throughout my life. And I think ultimately what I've come to is creating more and more chances for young people to gain the kinds of education that I was very fortunate to have received here, where you are in a system that totally explodes your mind and gives you access to critical thinking and these powerful tools with which to change the world, and creating that access at greater scale. The issue that we have is that we have nodes of impact. I think where we start to see more broad-scale difference is when we start creating those opportunities for people from the most disadvantaged parts of our world at much broader scale. And then in time, when those forces, when those young people come together in greater number, you start to see the shift in those institutions. But certainly, I think it's going to be difficult to be able to have lone wolves pushing for change from the inside, which is why I think we have to tackle this broader question of political change from the level of education where you hit the broadest base. And I don't know that you can do it in the region because of the way that our ministries of education kind of co-opt the education system. So I think our role as people who have opportunity is to be able to find a way to get as many people as possible into opportunity, whether it's in pockets of opportunity like AUB in Lebanon, which I think is a space of kind of mind-changing action, or places like this, and then in time we go back and lead the change of our communities, but not alone. We have to have scale to achieve real change. Thank you.